Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso, and this evening we'll be looking at a couple discourses from the Buddha, from the Anguttara Nikaya. So I'll start with paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll read through these two short discourses, give some explanations, and then I'll take any questions at the end. So please feel free to type in questions relevant to the discourse at any time. So I'll start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So we'll be looking here at Anguttara Nikaya chapter 4, suttas number 95 and 96, which are two back-to-back suttas on the same topic. So one is giving a bit more explanation of the previous one, which is why we'll be doing both of them together. So we're starting with Anguttara Nikaya 4.95, so chapter 4, sutta number 95, the Chavālāta Sutta, which is translated here as a firebrand. So this is using the translation of Venerable Bhante Suddhāso from Sutta Central. And I will be adjusting the translation a little bit as we go along. So the discourse begins. The Buddha says, "Monks, these four people are found in the world. What for? One who practices to benefit neither themselves nor others. One who practices to benefit others but not themselves. One who practices to benefit themselves but not others. And one who practices to benefit both themselves and others." So these are the four kinds of people the Buddha is bringing up here. So a person who benefits neither themselves or others, one who practices to benefit others but not themselves, one who practices to benefit themselves but not others, and one who practices to benefit both themselves and others. So then the Buddha gives a simile. He says, suppose there was a firebrand for lighting a funeral pyre, so a piece of firewood, burning at both ends and smeared with feces in the middle. It could not be used as timber, either in the village or the wilderness. And he says, the person who practices to benefit neither themselves nor others is like this. So he's really emphasizing here that someone who is not working either for their own benefit or the benefit of others is completely useless. There is no benefit to them whatsoever. They're like a burned chunk of wood smeared with feces. One of the charming things about the Buddha is he very often used quite crude metaphors to communicate his points. So then the Buddha continues. He says, the person who practices to benefit others but not themselves is better than that. So this is quite understandable. So somebody who's not practicing to benefit anyone clearly isn't of much good. But someone who's practicing to benefit others and not themselves is significantly better. They're at least doing something of benefit for others. But then the Buddha says, he says, the person who practices to benefit themselves but not others is better than both of those. And this is a very interesting statement, because often when we think about concepts like kindness and compassion, we think that practicing for the benefit of others is more important than practicing for the benefit of ourselves. But here the Buddha seems to be giving an opposite message. So he says the person who practices only for their own benefit is better than the person who practices only for the benefit of others. So why is that? And one metaphor which is quite useful is the metaphor of a lifeguard. So a lifeguard wants to help other people. But what happens if the lifeguard doesn't know how to swim? They can't be of much benefit to anybody at all. So first the lifeguard needs to take time training themselves in how to survive, training themselves in how to keep themselves safe. Then they can train in how to help others, how to be of benefit to others. Or another example would be, say, a therapist, somebody who's completely mentally deranged, completely emotionally unstable, somebody with no ability to control their own mind. And then they're put in charge of trying to help other people. Odds are not going to go particularly well. So the first thing is stabilizing oneself, bringing some clarity and self-control to one's own mind, to one's own emotions, to one's own subconscious impulses. Then one actually has the clarity and stability in order to be of benefit to others. The other important thing here to keep in mind is that when we're talking about Buddhist practice and benefiting oneself, well, actually in benefiting oneself, eventually one comes to the recognition that self-centeredness is in fact an obstacle to one's own happiness and wisdom. So even out of pure self-centered interest, one will eventually work on eliminating one's self-centeredness, which then will naturally manifest in compassion, in doing what one can to benefit others. So then this leads to the fourth person. So the Buddha says, the person who practices to benefit both themselves and others is the foremost, the best, the chief, the highest, the finest of the four, which is quite understandable. So naturally being of benefit both to oneself and others is the highest way of practicing. And the Buddha gives another metaphor here. He says, from a cow comes milk, from milk comes curd, from curd comes butter, from butter comes ghee, and from ghee comes cream of ghee. And cream of ghee is said to be the best of these. In the same way, the person who practices to benefit both themselves and others is the foremost, the best, the chief, the highest, and the finest of the four. These are the four people found in the world. So a brief discourse with a couple of metaphors. And the central point here, once again, is that ideally, of course, we're practicing to benefit both ourselves and others. But failing that, it is actually in accordance with Buddhist principles to focus on training oneself, to focus on bettering oneself. An example of this was years ago. I was talking to someone who was saying that she likes going on meditation retreats, but she feels guilty about leaving her children behind, like not being there for her children for a few days while she's off at a meditation retreat. That's like, well, actually, that's one of the best things you can do for your children is to go on meditation retreats, train your mind, build up your own mental and emotional self-awareness and self-control, so that you actually have something to model and demonstrate for your children, so that you actually have the capacity to be there for your children. So you actually have the capacity to be of maximum benefit to your children. Actually, it's much worse to completely neglect the training of your mind. Then you won't be of good for yourself, but you also won't be of much benefit for your children either. If you really want to be of benefit to the people in your life, then you need to work on straightening out your own heart, purifying your own mind. Then I'll read through the second discourse. So again, this is another discourse on the same topic. So it starts off with the same opening. This is Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 4, sutta number 96. So the immediately following sutta, the Rāgavinaya sutta, which means the removal of greed. And the Buddha says, monks, these four people are found in the world. What for? One who practices to benefit themselves, but not others. One who practices to benefit others, but not themselves. One who practices to benefit neither themselves nor others, and one who practices to benefit both themselves and others. So the same list of four that the Buddha just gave in the previous sutta. And the Buddha here says, he says, how does a person practice to benefit themselves but not others? It's when a person practices to remove their own greed, hate, and delusion, but does not encourage others to do the same. The word here that's translated as encourage can also mean to incite or to make others do so. So it's a bit stronger than just encouraging others. It's more like helping other people to do so. Then the next one, he says, that's how a person practices to benefit themselves but not others. How does a person practice to benefit others but not themselves? It's when a person does not practice to remove their own greed, hate, and delusion, but does encourage others to remove theirs. And how does a person practice to benefit neither themselves nor others? So again, this is the least praiseworthy person. It's a person who does not practice to remove their own greed, hate, and delusion, and does not encourage others to remove theirs. And how does a person practice to benefit both themselves and others? It's when a person practices to remove their own greed, hate, and delusion and encourages others to remove theirs. So that's the end of that sutta. And so here the Buddha is giving a bit more clarity on what he means when he's talking about benefit, when he's talking about benefiting either yourself or others or both. So he's not talking about benefit in ordinary worldly ways of like helping somebody get a job or helping somebody start a business or helping somebody finish their degree or helping somebody find a spouse or anything like that. The Buddha is not talking about ordinary worldly benefit. He's talking about the purification of the heart. He's talking about identifying our desires, identifying our aversion, identifying our delusion, and eliminating these things from the mind. Because this is the highest form of benefit. So things like helping somebody make a bit more money or get a better job or get a spouse or something, that might bring them some short-term temporary benefits. It might not, by the way. It might actually not bring them any real benefit at all. It might bring them some short-term benefit, maybe. But ultimately, it's not actually addressing the underlying problems. So the underlying problem is, why are we suffering? Why are we experiencing dukkha? Why are we experiencing discomfort and discontent? And it doesn't have anything to do with how much money we have or what kind of job we have or whether or not we have a spouse or whatever. Like, that's all completely irrelevant. Our dukkha, our suffering, is caused by greed, hatred, and delusion. It's caused by desire, aversion, and confusion. It's caused by these core inner defilements of mind. This constant tendency of wanting things, of resisting things, and this constant delusion, the delusion of permanence, the delusion of self-identity, the delusion of conditional happiness, these fundamental misunderstandings of reality that just keep fueling our desire and aversion, and therefore just keep fueling our suffering. So how can we be of benefit to ourselves? Well, it's by working to eliminate our greed, hatred, and delusion. It's by working to cultivate a mind of contentment, a mind of compassion, a mind with a clear, direct insight into impermanence, that all things are impermanent, all things are unsatisfying, and all things are impersonal. This is the way to benefit ourselves. And how do we benefit others? Well, it's by helping other people to learn how to reduce their desires, reduce their aversion, how to cultivate contentment, how to cultivate generosity, how to cultivate compassion, kindness, teaching other people how to directly observe the truth of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and the impersonal nature of all things. So this is how we can actually be of real benefit. So this is an important addendum to the previous sutta because it clarifies exactly what the Buddha means when he's talking about benefit. He's not meaning it in a mundane sense, but he's talking about the purification of the mind, the cultivation of a spiritual practice which eliminates defilement and delusion from the mind. So that's these two suttas, so a couple of short delicious discourses, so we can respect the suttas at this time with 3 sadhus, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And hello to the people joining in online. Hello to Marielle, Jayanta, Nick, Lilani, Mary, Yankee, Bhumika, Ronald, Louisa, and everybody else who's watching and haven't checked in. Good to see all of you. And I don't see any questions online. Are there any questions from the residents here at the monastery? Any questions related to this discourses? Do you have something? There's one question here. So Asud asks, if one just follows the Eightfold Path, would that count as practicing for oneself and for others? Well, I don't know what you mean by just following the Eightfold Path, because the Eightfold Path is very comprehensive and deep. So to sincerely and thoroughly follow the Eightfold Path is to practice the entirety of Buddha Dhamma. It contains within it all of the Buddha's teachings and practices. So following the Eightfold Path is a really big deal. If one is doing it with sincerity, then practicing the Eightfold Path in its depth is literally everything the Buddha taught and leads all the way to full awakening. And yes, that definitely is practicing for the benefit of both oneself and others. Yeah, go ahead.
Does that mean we need to practice for the benefit of ourselves first and then develop it to the benefit of both ourselves and others? Because the later one is the foremost.
Yes. So actually, yes, it usually does take the form of first we focus on building up our own practice, practicing for our own benefit, because then that's how you can be of benefit to others. So again, like if you decide tomorrow that you want to be a firefighter, you're not just going to like immediately go off and find a burning building and go in there and try to help people. First, you go to firefighter training. You spend time learning how to actually do things of benefit that will be of benefit to others. So you first go through a period of training in order to build up the ability to help others. Well, it's exactly the same with Buddhist practice. The aspiration to help other people is very noble. It's very useful. It's very important. And if you want to help other people, you need to make sure that you're actually capable, that you actually have the wisdom and self-discipline to be able to be of benefit to other people. So yeah, that does mean in the beginning, we're focusing on building up our own practice. We're focusing on training our own mind, on conquering our own defilements. And as we do that, then it becomes clearer how we can be of benefit to others.
But the first step is not self-centeredness.
So the thing is that when we talk about practicing for the elimination of suffering, it always starts with yourself. So is the practice self-centered in the beginning? Yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah. And as you practice with diligence, then eventually that will lead to the destruction of self-centeredness. If you look at the Buddha's reflections prior to attaining awakening, the Buddha's initial reflection was, how can I get free of this massive suffering? The Buddha, well, he wasn't the Buddha yet. The Bodhisattva, he recognized, I am immersed in all of this dukkha. How can I get free of all of this dukkha? And then as he developed his practice, he eventually realized that, as he's saying in these suttas, there's no separation between practicing for one's own benefit and practicing for the benefit of others. As you train your own mind, eventually you get to a point where you realize that self-centeredness itself is an obstacle to your own progress. So practicing only for your own self-benefit, if it's done with sincerity in accordance with the Buddhist principles, eventually leads to getting rid of self-centeredness. Eventually, it naturally leads to practicing for the benefit of others as well. And if it doesn't get to that point, it's a sign that you've gone off track somewhere along the way. It's usually a sign that somebody's not quite understanding the Buddha's teachings. So I've met people like this. I've met people who've been, theoretically, they've been practicing Buddhism for 20, 30 years or longer. And they're really self-centered and stingy. And it's like, well, what the heck have they been doing all these years? Like, what's been going wrong? What are they missing? And usually a bit of questioning and investigation, it becomes clear that they're actually missing out on large sections of the Buddhist teachings, large aspects of the Buddhist practice. Maybe they're doing a bunch of meditation or something, but they're not practicing Buddhism. They're only practicing a fragment of the path. If you're actually practicing the Buddha's teachings completely, then at some point you wind up eliminating your own selfishness and cultivating boundless compassion. Yeah.
Is trying to get more good karma part of self-centeredness?
So the thing is that a certain amount of mundane good karma is actually helpful. So, for example, it's easier to practice when you're relatively healthy. And being healthy is the result of mundane good karma. It's easier to practice when you have a certain amount of free time. And being wealthy enough to have the luxury of free time is the result of mundane good karma. It's easier to practice when your life is relatively harmonious. You're not dealing with a lot of fighting and struggle in your life. And harmony is the result of mundane good karma. So a certain amount of mundane good karma is directly supportive to one's Dhamma practice. But it's not the goal. Like if you just focus on good karma, you'll just wind up being reborn in a heaven realm, which is fine. It's kind of like going on vacation for a few millennia, but it's not really useful for attaining awakening. So that's why it's not the focus. So we still cultivate a certain amount of good karma, but we do so with the understanding that its point is to support transcending samsara. So we cultivate mundane good karma because we recognize that a certain amount of mundane good karma is supportive to Buddhist practice. It's supportive to awakening. But we don't do it just for the sake of having a nice mansion in the heaven realms or something. That would be really missing the point. And as I was saying earlier, this is actually the case with a lot of nominally Buddhist people in the world. They're not really practicing Buddhism. They're practicing good karmaism. They're practicing rebirth in heavenism, which is fine. It's just not Buddhism. Yeah.
How can we best practice discernment of when we have been like practicing for ourselves and then reaching the point of helping other people and like meshing those two things together? I'm like, okay, do I feel qualified? Do I feel that I am and can be of benefit to another person?
Well, one thing is that whenever you're in the presence of another person, pay attention to them. Pay attention and look to see, is there something I can do that will be of benefit? But that also depends upon strong self-awareness. Because if what we're doing is coming from a place of confusion or self-centeredness or attention-seeking, then that's not so good. And usually that means that our intention will be blurred. So ideally, helping other people comes from a place of inner serenity and clarity, which allows us to see how to help others. Does that answer your question? So it's not necessarily easy to put into words how you know when it's time to help somebody else, but it's something that when an opportunity presents itself and you clearly see something you can do, then you just do it. And so a lot of that arises from the cultivation of clarity, contentment, self-restraint through your practice. That makes it easier to see those openings when you're interacting with other people. But when you're interacting with other people, in the beginning, the focus is mainly going to be on paying attention. Paying attention to what they're presenting, trying to figure out what's going on underneath that, trying to feel what's going on underneath that. So this isn't really an intellectual thing I'm talking about. But also being very self-aware, aware of what's going on in your own mind and heart, and how that's reacting to the other person's presence and whatever they're presenting. So that's part of what makes it quite complicated, is it's dealing with two relatively complex structures. Your own inner structure, which you need to be very clearly aware of, and the other person's inner structure, which you can only ever have a certain awareness of, because we're just going on external appearances. Which is why I was saying earlier that a lot of our practice is just about making mistakes and learning from our mistakes and really coming back to our firm intention of wanting to purify our mind, wanting to be of benefit to others, and trying to see what can we do that will actually have that effect. And recognizing that along the way, we're going to make a lot of mistakes and screw up a lot. And you try to learn from that and keep going. Okay? Yeah. Okay. Anything else? So Sud asks, what would be an example of practicing for only oneself and not for others? Well, as the Buddha says, working on eliminating your own greed, hatred, and delusion, but not supporting others in that. So an example of that actually would be a long period of personal retreat. You get a little cabin in the woods and you just go there for a week or a month and just focus on doing your own practice for a while. That's great. That's wonderful. Go for it. And that will benefit exactly one person, you. However, if you practice diligently during that time, then when you emerge from that period of personal retreat, you'll find that you're better able to be of benefit to other people. Your own inner purity of heart means that you're less likely to act in harmful ways. So when your own greedy or aversive impulses arise, you'll be able to control them so you don't do anything harmful to others. Your own clarity of mind and stability of mind will make it easier for you to see what's going on in the people around you and to see the opportunities to be of benefit to others. Again, it's a period of time which, while you're doing a personal retreat, for example, it's only really benefiting you during that time. But the result is that afterwards you'll be of better capacity to benefit others. Again, that's assuming you're practicing correctly. Okay, and that's the last question online. Anything else? Good enough for now? Pretty straightforward discourse. Okay, so we'll go ahead and conclude the session at this time with 3 more sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.